Oh, okay, we're in.
We are live. Are you good?
I think so. Yep, I'm
I
good.
mean, I can see you, I can hear you. Let's hope the fans can as well. Speaking of the fans, let's say good
Fans.
morning to them. The fans. We've got Jarek. I'm maybe it's Headache. Is it Headache? Because you've got a very Spanish sounding surname and the J at the front might be a H sound. I'm sorry if I've messed up your name. Let us know in the chat how to pronounce your name. Sorry. Patrick, I can pronounce your name. Good morning to you. And Vianney. Vianney. I'm sorry, butchering pronunciations left, right, and center. David's in the building. Thank you guys for all joining us this morning for a very special session. Why is it special? Well, we've had this man on the stream before. It was right when he'd started using Slater, and since then, he's been using it very consistently. Pretty much every time he uses Webflow, I heard on his newly released podcast, which he is doing with Matt Maker Evans. In fact, let me put it in the chat while we're talking about that now. But Alan, thank you so much for joining us on the stream. Appreciate you tremendously for coming on.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, it's great. It's good to be back on, and it's been a bit of a whirlwind of a 24 hours. Yeah,
It very much
super fun.
has. It's been, if you guys have been following Alan on Twitter, we've got a new podcast that's released, which he basically does a kind of deep dive into whatever topic, as far as I can tell from having a listen to the first few episodes, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's kind of a deep dive into whatever topic you and Matt decide before recording. Is that fair?
It's so myself and Matt have been like video calling each other about once every 2 weeks for the last year or something, and we just kind of said some of this stuff could be valuable, and let's try and turn it into a podcast. And it's just like what's on our minds at the moment in the Webflow space. So the last couple of weeks, there's been Webflow Conf, there's been the new UI, and then like Matt started using Slater this week, and I've been working on Slater. I don't know what's it like the last 4 months, and then obviously with this coming up, so Slater was at the forefront of my mind. So that's how we ended up talking about Slater yesterday.
Awesome.
So yeah, it's just kind of two guys going into their 40s talking about no code.
It's got strong dad banter. If anyone is a fan of the dad banter, then have a listen, guys. I'm just going to share the screen so you guys can have a little look at all of this stuff. So this is Matt, and we've got some funny little clips. This is their little artwork. So if you see that on Spotify, I've put the link in the chat just now. And a lot of dad banter, a lot of Webflow, and the most recent episode was all about Slater, which I thought was fascinating. So go give that a listen if you're interested in Slater. So today we are going to be talking about the DOM element. Now, let's set the scene here. Timothy Ricks posts a tweet saying, "I've just found this," and he basically found it by finding it through an app in the Webflow app marketplace. This was confirmed that Webflow, it's something that they had been working on for a while, and I don't think they were like Timothy Ricks was meant to find it as early as he did, but he has. And Twitter space went mental. There were a lot of people, me included, who were like, I've heard of this word, the DOM, but what is it? How does it react to, or how does it benefit me knowing about it as a Webflower? And then you obviously got involved in the conversation as someone who's pretty, I'd say, in the higher end of the Webflow coding space. I mean, the term Webflower is a bit because there's all sorts of different people who are using it, from people who have literally, this is their first website that they're building, to people that are coming at it from hard coders to people who just want to speed up their workflow when creating websites. And you waded into the conversation and have been doing some super interesting stuff combining Slater and the DOM element which we're going to talk about today. Is there anything that I haven't mentioned there that you feel like I should mention to set the scene?
Well, first of all, you're being incredibly kind in positioning
Stop it.
position me in the way you did. Um, yeah, like if you think of everything in Webflow as an element, all the features that we have on the left of screen, they're all elements. They call them elements. So the DOM element is just what Webflow called this particular element. And yeah, it did kind of come out of the blue, but like I never used the Unsplash app until um I just didn't see I needed a use case for it. And then I saw what Timothy Ricks did, and I used the Unsplash app, and like straight away I saw what was going on. So when you use the Unsplash app, you do not use the Webflow native image element. And it's clear as day. You'll see it. It doesn't look like the image element, and it is not an image element. So obviously Timothy used this, noticed that, and was like, what is this? And dissected it and saw that it's got a lot of potential. And by potential, if you think of the DOM element, it is literally just a way of customizing HTML tags in its most basic form. So we can create our own HTML tags, image tags, button tags, iframes, A tags, heading tags. And I know a lot of these are already native in Webflow, but it just allows us to do that. And there's still some limitations with the DOM element that is baked into Webflow. But in the very top level, it allows us to use elements without having to use semantic HTML, without having to use the embed, the native Webflow embed. And that's exciting because it allows us style directly onto the element instead of having to add a class inside an embed.
Bazinga, very well explained. And yeah, I think people have been like, whoa, what's this DOM element? But actually the DOM has it's not a new thing. It's actually just the fact that you can manipulate this DOM element within Webflow is the new thing. I know I've actually put a link to a shameless plug for Webflow, this podcast and articles and newsletter thing I do, but I wrote a very down-to-earth article for idiots like me to try and understand the DOM a little bit more and its use cases. But we are going to be, thank you, great use of Bazinga. I appreciate that. I don't know if it is, I don't know if I'm meant to be using the word Bazinga as much as I am, but I am. But today we're going to actually have a look at some particular use cases for the DOM element, because I think the fact that it's kind of this amorphous thing right now, it's like, well, you can manipulate HTML and SVGs and JavaScript. It's like, cool, but like, what does that actually mean in real terms? So we're going to dive into that today. If anyone has any questions in the chat, feel free to ask away. I want this to be an interactive session. I don't want to be the one that's just asking all the questions, because frankly, I don't know enough to ask the best questions. So I want you guys to get involved too. So how do you think it would be best to begin? Do you reckon it would be, do you want to show us a little bit about how you're using Slater more generally, and then how you're using that particularly with the DOM element in projects? Or, what do you think would be best?
What I'll do is I'll show you the end result of what I built yesterday,
Great.
which is a CMS powered lightbox. That is, so we're using the Webflow CMS to generate the content within the lightbox. We're using the DOM element in 2 instances to create the correct semantic HTML. And then we're using Slater to write the code to trigger how the lightbox operates. So I think that's probably the way to do it. I think I'll show you the end results. And yeah, I'll just kind of go into Webflow and maybe we'll try and recreate some of the elements, some of the interactivity and some of the functionality later on.
That's awesome. Okay, so yeah, let's have a little look at the end result there. Like I said, if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask away. And I think it's also worth saying that a lot of this stuff, if you guys are interested, another plug, if you guys are interested in all the stuff that we talk about today, I am absolutely certain that this type of content will be in Alan's Netflix style community-based course, which I am part of. A lot of amazing content. And essentially, he's trying to kind of democratize online learning, which I think is really, really powerful idea. All these videos constantly updated, and whatever he learns, he shares in this community. So I'm going to put a link in there as well. Feel free to go check it out and potentially join. There's an incredible bunch of people that are already consuming that content, and I must say it's really impressive how there's just like constant content being uploaded. So go check that out if you're a fan of today's session. Okay, end of plug.
Thanks.
Is there anything else before we dive in? Are you going to share your screen, or
I think so. Yeah, I'll just click share screen here and
click share screen, and I will whack you onto the big screen. Could never be too much in regards to the bazinga there. If there's any other words you want me to use during the session, any other buzzwords, guys, then let me know.
Okay, yeah. So we've got this. You can see my screen here, yeah?
You now can.
Okay, great. So I'm just going to check that you can see Webflow, Slater, and our pushed deployed code live site, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So what we've got here is you can, if you recognize the dummy content from Webflow, this is the dummy content within the team CMS. And if we click on Caroline and click the background or click on Dolly, they pop up, and all the individuals, they all pop up according to who they are. And not only that, we're able to navigate within the lightbox itself. So this is all CMS driven. We've all used the awesome feature that is the lightbox in Webflow, and it has got connectivity, but it's quite tricky to operate it as a CMS function. So this is the end result. It works really well. And yeah, so this is what I built out yesterday. This is the script. Let's zoom in a bit because it's quite. And basically, what we're saying here is we're targeting a button with the class of my button. There's a click function that loops through. So on click, it loops through each of the buttons. So it looks for each of these buttons. So if any of these buttons are clicked, it will trigger the JavaScript. And then in doing that, it looks for a target with a data attribute. It looks for the data attribute modal select, and the value of that must be equal to modal target. And if that value is equal, then it changes the image of the person or the content, the CMS content from display none to display block. So we're not, with a lightbox, what you normally would be doing is taking JSON data, but this is specific to Webflow. We're displaying things and hiding things based on the display function, as opposed to pulling data in a JSON format. And then once that is done, once that script has completed, it goes to the next line here, which it gets the element by ID, which is the modal, and then it displays that as a flex, which is how we get everything aligned here into the center. If you can see, if you can imagine, this is display flex, and if we inspect Dolly here, you can see there's a style display block. And if I change it. Oh yeah, you can see that Dolly changed to display none. So that's kind of how that bit operates. Then this last bit down here is saying, it triggers the whole thing. And then at the end, this last bit here is the click function at the background that allows us close our lightbox. So the way I built this out, you can see here, this is why the AI side of it, helping me debug and write the little pieces of script. I had in my mind what I wanted to do, asked the right questions, got the small snippets of code for each step, kind of in the way that I explained it there, and iterated and updated, and sometimes even just was like, copy this area and debug it for me and tell me if I've done things correctly. So that's how the script works. How, getting back to the DOM, why the DOM is how I'm using the DOM in this instance. So you can see here that all of these, this is a CMS driven, this here is CMS driven, and we've got these buttons, these elements that I've given the class of DOM button. I try and just, it might be a bit easier to see. But yeah. But what's nice about this is over here on this side, we're able to give this element, the DOM element, a tag called the button tag. And why is this important? So in Webflow, it's going to get the button element. You can be like, well, we have this element called button. But if I publish this, and we'll inspect what's actually going on here.
It's a link.
It's actually just a link. And so when we inspect this little button tag here, it's actually just a link with the style, with a class of button. So it's not a button. It doesn't do things. It links to things. So if in the very basic concept, a button does things like pop-ups are triggered by buttons, for example. Menus are triggered, menu open and close is triggered by a button. Whereas going between page and page is triggered by a link. So that's the difference. And you can see when I inspect the code here and I go through my list items, I get to my DOM, or get to my DOM element, it renders as a semantic HTML tag button. And I've given that button an ID called my button. And then that ID is what is targeted by the JavaScript that lives inside in Slater. And that allows the button to do something. So in summary, we have now got a semantically correct button because it's doing something. And the ID is connecting to that JavaScript, which allows the button to do what I'm asking it to do. Now, the way I got around this before with Webflow was in the button tag is I would change the role, the button. And this is correct. Like, you're able to do this. So now the link, you can see down here in the bottom, now the link has a role of button. And I can, just because we're in this kind of, I'll put in a nav. And I will change the nav to here. So we're going to look for this menu button when we inspect both of these elements. So the role equals button solution is, it is correct. And you can see, I know it's not hard, it's kind of hard to see because it's not styled. But if we click in here, I'm trying to find our little menu button. You can see that Webflow have a div with the role of button as its menu button. So it's even in the Webflow native UI that they understand that they don't have a native button feature. So what Webflow have done is they've used the div, given it the role of button, and that's actually probably better than having a link with a href inside it, to not have the href in there, so it's not being seen by the browsers. So in this instance, their button with an ARIA label menu is being targeted and is doing things.
So I wonder why there isn't a button though for Webflow. Like, do you know why that is? Like, why isn't there? That just seems like a strange thing to just not have.
I don't know. I don't know. Maybe it's, I don't know. Maybe it's got to do with just having to educate people more on HTML and semantic HTML, because there is a lot of, like, within Webflow, like, you can make elements using divs and give them the functionality of a button using animations, using, even targeting them through small bits of JavaScript and classes and stuff, but they're still not a button. They have the functionality, but they don't have a button. So yeah, it's definitely a thing that should, I suppose it's got to do with what is, like, it's at the end of the day, Webflow is just a tool, and the tool is as good as it's the person using it. So in order to know that that in this instance you need a button over a link, that's got to do with the developer. It's not necessarily the responsibility of Webflow. But it is, they didn't allow you even use, so before I would have had to put in like an embed and create a tag of button to do if I wanted to do something like this. And this definitely wasn't, this was definitely baked into Webflow that you could not do this, because I tried to do this in the past, and it's only in the last maybe 6 months to a year that you're able to use the button tag in the embed code. You could put it in before, but I know it didn't render in the published sites. So you always had to go a tag role button. Oh, incorrect.
Just for anyone that's watching, is like, wait, I've just been dragging the button element onto the canvas every single time I wanted a button. Like, does that affect SEO, or like, what? I mean, is there any kind of tangible impact to that other than it just being like not a button, it's a link?
Yes, there is. So this is going to be hard to see, but I'm tabbing through. See how you're tabbing through at the moment? Can you see that?
So there's accessibility.
An accessibility thing more than anything else.
Okay.
Accessibility one, and also functionality. That, like, if you're going down the route of get requests and post requests and using JavaScript, it should be a button. And if a link has a get request in it, it's not. It's kind of going to mess things up. So one thing is that the very top level, it's accessibility, that it should say that this is a button that does something, essentially. So if someone is reading it using a screen reader, they'll tab onto something and it'll say, this button has a menu that pops up in a slightly different language. Or,
Okay.
yeah, that's essentially what it would say. So I'm kind of going on a bit of a tangent about the button versus link element, but this is probably, in my opinion, it's probably going to be the thing that will be the most use case for Webflow people, is that you'll be able to create native buttons in Webflow. Now, in this instance, you can see I've created my buttons, and my buttons are connected to a CMS. And I've got another element here called, another element which has gone, oh, there it is. It's the modal. Okay, and this is hidden at the moment because I've given it a tag of dialogue. So you see the way there, a rid of tag dialogue. And when I put it back in, disappears. So I'm pretty sure that everybody has built a pop-up native, like built their own pop-ups in Webflow, a click function that opens up this modal background pop-up, and it's got some content inside. So the majority of the time people would do this with a div and give it the class of pop-up or class of modal, hide it, give it an opacity of 0, and also display it to none. A dialogue tag is that modal. It is that pop-up. But when you give it a dialogue tag, it's got baked in features, HTML features, like a dialogue should always be hidden before an action is taken on it. So you can see here that the display is none.
I've been doing this wrong my whole life. Okay. Helpful.
Quite a lot of people have, because I think WebBay is the only person that I've seen to do a tutorial on how to correctly create a pop-up with a button and a dialogue semantic tag. So go check out his stuff. He gets into the weeds. It's class. It's so nerdy, and it's really, really, really impressive how granular he gets.
Awesome.
Yeah, and you can also see here that we've got an absolute value already given to the dialogue. So it's the HTML knows what we want it to do. And yeah, so that's how I kind of gone off track there. So that's the second way in this particular circumstance, how to use the DOM to make our websites more accessible, semantically correct, and just bring them to a higher level of development, essentially. Now, for the rest of this, adding in, I have to say, custom attributes, when they released custom attributes and connecting that to CMS, it's like my favorite feature in Webflow since Animations 2.0. That, and now the DOM element to give us more flexibility. I'm just like, this is great. This is amazing. I'm having so much fun with it. But once I've used these two things now, the button and the dialogue, everything else have moved over to Slater, and we started writing out my code, and now we've got this native CMS driven lightbox. Yeah, so I suppose I've kind of harped on there a bit, so we can. I don't know. I first of all, I just want to make sure I'm not going too fast.
No, so you've got some questions coming in, so maybe this is a good time to tackle some of those. So let's start with David. The problem with DOM elements is that they can't be converted into components, no?
Like a Webflow component? Is that? Yes, they can.
I assume he's talking about Webflow components. David, if we've misunderstood you, do comment.
I will just give you my secret sauce. So my favorite, the command I use all the time is Command E and find. And if you type in DOM, I've got a DOM element component saved as a component. I add it to my project. I right click, unlink the instance, and then I turn it into, let's say, an iframe.
Shut the front door. Look at that, guys. Come on.
So,
come on.
And like, oh, maybe let's see if this iframe can be, because I haven't done it this way. I give it a tag of iframe and create a component. Save it as iframe.
Oh, look, it does work. Cool. So, David, it does seem to work. Question: before, the DOM element wasn't in, you couldn't find it in Webflow, and now, because I had to clone Timothy Ricks's clonable to get it, because I was trying to add the apps from the app marketplace and trying to find it, and then I just cloned his clonable. Now you can actually search for the DOM, just to be very clear.
In Webflow natively?
As in the panel on the left there, you
No,
can.
I brought the DOM into my project, and then I
You
saved it as a component called DOM to speed
so
up my own
you
workflow.
saved that. Okay.
So
Okay.
I've got my own Webflow template that I work off of, and this is just the
Right.
latest iteration to that.
Okay.
So yeah, to get the DOM, you launch Unsplash, and this is actually good. I'll show you how I think Timothy Ricks figured this out. So I will put in this image. Oops, I might have put in 2 or 3 of them there. I did. I put in 3 images. So let's delete them. Now, like, straight away I can see there's something off here. This is new. This is not an image tag. You can see there's
Yeah, you
this
can see
weird
the
little icon over here.
Mm.
And I'm like, what? So I'm assuming, I haven't talked to Timothy about this, but I'm assuming he used this app and he noticed this right off the bat that this was different. And then, he's got his styles over here which are great. Went into settings. He noticed that there's image settings, and he went through here and he's like, oh God, this is an image tag. And probably changed it. Like, okay, that
Yeah.
broke. Got an image. And all the attributes are inside here, like the alt tags, the source, the width, styling of the background. So this is actually how our images would render in and how you would connect images with a traditional environment, like you connect the source to it. Whereas with Webflow, we've got this lovely UI and it's done slightly differently. But I'm assuming that's what happened. He used it, saw that there was something different, inspected it, and noticed that that things were a little bit different, and Webflow is going to change forever.
Yeah. And question in regards to the DOM again. We've got, is the downside, so this is from Patrick here, is the downside of using at functions for actions an SEO downside?
In terms of, so if you're building anything, I would always try and abide by the rules that Google have prescribed as much as possible. So in terms of content-driven SEO, maybe not, but definitely in terms of because Google also monitor our sites based off of user experience, and if a button is doing something, even though the user experience might be correct, the user experience for someone who may have accessibility issues is less. So they would definitely negatively mark a product and a website on that. And maybe not, maybe don't think of it as a downside. Maybe think of it as an upside, that if your product or website has these features, then you're getting bonus points more so than you're getting penalized for doing it the other way around.
And I guess just from a flexibility perspective as well, like regardless of SEO, just the fact that you can use a single element and then manipulate that to use it for whatever you want, like as a kind of Swiss Army knife, and then connect that with Slater to take this thing to a whole new level. I mean, come on.
Yeah, and I'll just show a very simple use case of, a lot of people have been going on about it's just hype. Of course it's hype because people are excited about something new and shiny. Of course it's hype. And I constantly hearing people saying, oh, why don't you just use, like, there's already features that you can use for these workarounds. And that's true. If you want to keep using an embed, and I'm just going to go in here and I'm going to copy exactly this HTML. We want to put it in there. We've got our nice, get rid of the iframe. There's Dolly. And Dolly probably is going to do the same thing again. Maybe not. But there's Dolly. It's working. It's a button. It has its click functions. It's semantically correct. Now, in the Webflow world, how many times have you changed a class name? Or how many times have you misspelt something as a class? Or how many times have you just left it as button 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? So in this particular instance, I'm not going to have a project with the name DOM button on it because it doesn't make sense. I will change this name to just call it button. Now my button that's in an embed is broken because it's got the class of DOM button inside the embed, which isn't connected to any styles. So there is just a workflow use case of if you are using, and the Webflow embeds are super powerful, love using them. They provide a lot of value for features that are not native in Webflow. But why would you not use the DOM element in this instance? Because the risk of breaking your site is just reduced.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense, especially if it's also transferred to a client and then they're just like, I'm going to change some classes or whatever.
Yeah.
And they don't really realize what they're doing. Yep, so much fun. Okay, we've got, Rajan says natively there is still no DOM, but you can do via Webflow apps, e.g. via Unsplash. It does strike me a little bit odd that we don't have the DOM element just natively in Webflow, even after all of this stuff. But maybe there's educational pieces that Webflow are cooking up, and there's a lot more that they're planning on doing with the DOM. I don't know.
Yeah, and there is sorry to cut over you there. The DOM isn't perfect. It is not perfect at all. In this instance, so we've got I'll give it the class of button. I can type in on click equals something. We're not going to create an on click function, but on click does something. Okay. And if I create a DOM button, unlink this, turn it into a button. So we've got our button. We're going to give it text DOM button. And we'll give it an on-click function. On-click does nothing, and you'll see why I called it does nothing. And to be quite frank, this has completely pissed me off because it's completely unnecessary. And so I have found functions for the A tag that aren't native in Webflow that would be amazing if Webflow just didn't have certain things baked in. So Dolly in here, you can see, has got an on-click function that allows us to do something. So where would this be useful? If you're using a Calendly embed, for example, that Calendly uses on-click. On-click, show this Calendly, make it pop up with this link inside it. But if we go into the DOM element, Webflow have just removed the on-click function from the element. This is baked in to the Webflow product. I don't know why, but it doesn't make sense. I'm still able to create an on-click function using a button tag in the embed, but this super cool new feature I can't. There are workarounds with that by targeting the button with an ID, which is what I did with this. So I had to target with an ID. You can target with an ID or a data attribute or a class, but you can't create a non-click function on the button element for, I don't know why. And it's silly. It would make things way cooler.
Huh. Weird. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, maybe there's some explainer pieces to come from Webflow. because there are a lot of people that talk about stuff that's baked in to Webflow elements that they don't understand why that's the case. But c'est la vie. Anyone got any other questions? Jeff says, that's the perfect explanation. You lose all the power of styles in the Webflow designer with an embed versus a DOM element. So he's just summarized what you've said there. Great stuff, Jeff. Glad you're enjoying the stream. If there's anyone else that's got any questions, feel free to ask away. I think it would be worth, just for anyone that's watching this and is like, wait, what has been said? There's some really, really key things that I just want to highlight here. And maybe if there's anything else that I've missed, Alan, you can just say, Jack, you're an idiot. We definitely need to highlight this as well. But essentially, I mean, that's how I talk to myself. My therapist tells me not to.
Come on,
what we need to
kind.
do is we need to highlight some things. So the DOM element, you can't find that natively in Webflow still. So that's a really important thing. If you watch this stream and you're like, where's the DOM? Well, that's the thing. It's a little bit awkward right now. Two ways of doing it. One, you can look at the Unsplash app, and you'll see once you put a picture into your Webflow canvas, you'll see in the top left, when normally it has a little image icon, there's the DOM element icon. And then what you can do is you can go to settings of that element, and you'll see that you can manipulate it from an image to whatever else. So that's an important thing to say. The easier way to do it, though, frankly, is to just get a clonable. Timothy Ricks has got a clonable. You can copy that element like Alan's done and put it into your own project file that you can then duplicate every time you start a new project, which just means that you'll have it in there every time and you don't need to faff around in the app marketplace or get a random clonable and get it over every time, etc. So those are the two ways of getting it, as far as I know for now. Maybe tomorrow they're literally just going to release the DOM and in the designer, and this stream will be not as helpful. So that's the first thing. Sorry, you were going to say something.
And I would advise that once you've got, and the DOM can be copied and pasted very, very easily from project to project. And I would advise to create a component with the DOM element and store it in your components. And that would speed up your workflow. And maybe even get super. I think Matt Evans did. He has a thing in things.flow, and it is various versions of the DOM element saved as components that you can literally copy and paste into your project. So that's pretty innovative of him. It was great.
Yeah, in fact, why don't I put things.flow while we carry on doing this little recap of the session. Things.flow. I've got things.flow coming soon. Is he taking it down, or is it things.flow?
It's / the DOM element.
Okay.
Yeah, he's very secretive, our Matt.
He is. It's very weird. I don't know why he's working on so much cool stuff, but then he's yeah. Things.flow. Is it the webflow.io domain? Okay.
Things.flow DOM elements. Sorry, no duh. Can I join the chat?
Yeah. You should be able to post stuff in there. Things.flow DOM. Okay, while you're getting that up, I'll carry on with this recap. Second big thing that we talked about during this session is that the DOM element, it's not like the DOM element is new. It's just the DOM element itself is new inside Webflow. Right now, you can manipulate HTML, SVGs, JavaScript with this thing called the DOM element. It's basically a Swiss Army penknife, right? Which gives you a lot of flexibility when it comes to your projects. And the cool thing about it is that you can target on-click functions or animations or whatever with by naming the ID the class or by targeting attributes using Slater. So this is this magic triangle, guys, right? You've got Slater, you've got Webflow, and inside Webflow, you've got the DOM element. And now you can do a lot of stuff that maybe isn't that easy to do natively just with Webflow native components.
Yeah, and if people like, I can get a bit deeper into this and show how I've connected this script using attributes and IDs. We've already talked about the semantic HTML, so yeah, like I won't go too into the weeds about this script, but I'll talk about how I've targeted the particular elements. So you can see here that we're getting all the buttons, and I've just got this generic ID called my button. And I'll clear off all this here in the DOM element that I've given a HTML tag of button. I've given it an ID called my button. So when you're targeting an ID with JavaScript or jQuery, you add in this little, I hope people can see this. Is that better? Oh, too much. You add the hashtag before it. So that represents, that says you're targeting an ID as opposed to a class or anything else. So this is what's going on here. We're targeting all of the buttons with this ID. Now, this is where it got kind of, this is how I've connected it to the CMS. So we are looping through each of the buttons with this ID. And then on click, we're getting the value of this attribute. So this attribute is modal target. And you can see here, I've got an attribute inside the button settings, modal target equals, and I've connected it to the slug of the CMS. Okay, so just, does that make sense? Where the ID of this target, modal target attribute, is now the slug of the CMS. The script here says that the value of this attribute has to be the same value as the modal select attribute in that we're trying to display in our lightbox. So what I've done is, if we open up here and we go to our items, I believe, so our collection item, and we go down to the custom attributes, the modal select is equal to the slug. So in the Webflow collections, each collection item has a unique slug. It's got a unique collection ID, but it's also got a unique slug. And you know that if you try and make the slug the same, it'll make it like, give it a 1 or an A or a B or something at the end of it. So the slug is always going to be unique. When we go back here, let's just publish this so we can get rid of. And if I haven't messed around with things too much and broken this, when I click into this button, you can see it's got a class of button with the ID of my ID. So that's the first thing that's happening. We're targeting the button, all buttons with the ID of my ID. And then the button has the action of that button to pop up the content we want is targeting the slug. And if we click this, you can see that Caroline is there, and we inspect this element, and you can see we've got the dialog, which has got its correct semantic HTML, and we go through our list. So this is our collection list wrapper, our collection list, and our collection list items. And you can see that the modal select, so I chose select because the target is selecting Caroline, and that's how I've connected it to the CMS. And that's how Slater is targeting the functionality.
Fire. Need some clicks happening there. I don't want to break your ears. That's why I just did that instead of actual applause. I hope everyone understands that. We've got connections from Slater to Webflow, attributes. Then we've got the slug, which is connecting from the CMS. So we have functionality happening on click so that sweet Caroline, I won't ever do that again. Don't worry.
Well,
Shows up.
the more that is correct, but the more important thing, in my opinion, is that if that slug changes, it changes in two places. So the target and the select attributes change at the same time. If I become Jack, for example, if you become a part of that team and they add you to the team through the Webflow CMS, it's going to auto-populate your image, your name, and give you a unique slug. So the use case for the user at the end, in this particular example, if they add or delete staff members, this functionality remains the same. Nothing is going to change. It's not going to break unless there's like a bug in the, someone gets into the code or someone JavaScript is disabled somewhere. But
that's a really important point though, isn't it? Because it's just slug and that functionality happens regardless of how many different team members there are, etc. They can't mess it up. Well, ideally.
You can, but it's more difficult. The way you can mess it up is if you have another collection item called people, and Jack is also in people, because then Jack's the slug is just the very last attribute, the very last piece of data. It's not the full URL. So Webflow, if you're listening, can you please allow us target the folder and the slug in the text field of the custom embed, because that would make things very spicy.
Okay. Sorry, I understand you now. Yes, that makes a lot of sense. If Webflow have got this far into the stream, our numbers are dropping off. We had 10 and now we're at 5. I think it's because maybe we're going too deep, and people have got the nuts and bolts. It is lunchtime as well. I mean, it's 10 a.m. for me, but yes, it is, because it's like one with you. Okay, I think we should wrap this up. We have learned a hell of a lot. What I need to do is to download the transcript and write up an article that goes through this information, because there's a ton of stuff that we talked about. If anyone has any other questions, you know where to go. Slater Slack. I will put something in the chat. I also, while I'm getting up that link, though, I want to just quickly highlight a couple of things for you guys who might be interested in more information. Thevisualdiv.com is up and live. There is a really interesting episode about undying love for Slater. So if you're interested in learning more about why Slater is handy, go check that out. Then we also have, let's get happy Webflow.
There was just something there by Jeff, and he's a question there. So if you understand correctly, in HTML, all elements are DOM elements. I don't think that's necessarily correct in Webflow. I believe that the DOM element is the building blocks of all of the native elements in Webflow. I haven't built one myself, but going into their developer docs, it seems like the DOM element can be the catalyst to building something natively in Webflow. But what it does do is it renders as HTML. So when you publish your site, all the DOM element is HTML. If you add the DOM element without giving it a tag in your page, publish your page, you got a div. So the output of the DOM element is HTML.
Good stuff. David says, thanks, Alan Jack. Appreciate you. Thanks so much for coming onto the stream. JP says, you can press Command plus, comma, to open the code editor options to enlarge the font size within Slater. Hot tip there. Appreciate that, JP.
Thank you.
That is really helpful. And then a lot of people enjoying the stream. Great stuff, guys. Thanks from Jeff. Thank you, Jeff, for consistently making a hell of a lot of helpful content for the Slater community and generally getting involved in live streams. Alan, should we end it there? Go get some lunch.
Yep.
Appreciate you tremendously so much for coming on, sharing all your knowledge about the DOM.
Good.
Go join Happy DevFlow, guys, if you want more of this type of content, because there's a lot of quite nuanced things about the DOM that maybe we didn't go into today, that there's a hell of a lot of different use cases, and the implications of this plus attributes plus Slater is wild. Like I just think it's really important to stress that there's so much here, and I'm sure that there's so much education around the DOM element that Webflow are going to provide that's going to open up, new opportunities for people, or at least raise their awareness to what the implications of this are for Webflow development. And then if you combine that with a little bit of custom code in Slater, oh man, yeah, I mean, it's just wild. Anyway, let's wrap it up. Thank you so much for coming on the stream. And if anyone has any other questions, message us on Twitter, message Alan on Twitter, listen to the Visual Dev, and also to Visual Div and go to Happy. I'm getting confused because it's Happy Dev Flow and the Visual Div, not the Visual Dev, the visualdiv.com. Go listen to the podcast. It's great. All right, I'm going to end the stream before I make any more mistakes.
All right. Good man. Thanks very much, Jack. Thanks, everybody. Send us a message on Twitter if you